In the summer of 2008, a young woman fell from a Manhattan balcony 4 days before her 21st birthday. She had graced the covers of Vogue, starred in perfume campaigns as a fairy tale princess, and earned a nickname that followed her everywhere she went, the Russian Rapunzel. By every measure the fashion industry used, Ruslana Korshunova had made it. She was represented by the same agency as Kate Moss. She had bought her family a house back home in Kazakhstan. She commanded thousands of dollars for a single day's work. When her body was found on Water Street that June afternoon, her famous hair, the waist-length chestnut locks that had defined her entire career, had been crudely cut short. The ends were uneven, as if hacked with scissors. This is the story of a girl who looked like she stepped out of a legend. It is also the story of what that legend cost her, and of the shadows that gathered in the space between the image the world saw and the person who could no longer survive inside it. Almaty, Kazakhstan, 2002. A photograph of a 15-year-old girl appeared in an in-flight magazine. The photo had nothing to do with modeling. It accompanied a small feature about her local German language club, one of those filler pieces airlines use to pad their publications. She was one of several students pictured. It should have been forgettable. But something about her face stopped a British talent scout named Debbie Jones mid-flight. Jones worked for Models One, a London agency with a reputation for discovering international talent in unexpected places. She had seen thousands of young faces in her career, had learned to spot the particular combination of features that photographs well, that translates across cultures. This face was different. This one, she later said, looked like something out of a fairy tale. The girl had enormous dark eyes that seemed to hold depths, delicate bone structure that caught light in unusual ways, and hair that fell past her waist in thick, chestnut waves. She looked otherworldly. She looked like the kind of face that could launch campaigns. Jones tracked down the girl behind the photograph. It took effort. This was Kazakhstan, not London or Paris. But Jones was persistent. Her name was Ruslana Korshunova. She was a serious student who spoke 4 languages fluently: Russian, English, Kazakh, and German. She had excelled academically and had never considered modeling as a path forward. Her father, a Red Army officer, had died when she was just 5 years old, leaving her mother Valentina to raise Ruslana and her older brother alone. They lived in circumstances that were comfortable by local standards, but far removed from the world of international fashion. Ruslana had never thought of her appearance as a commodity. She was a studious girl with linguistic gifts, the kind of teenager who might have become a translator or a diplomat. The photograph in the magazine was incidental. Within weeks of Jones making contact, Ruslana was signed. The agency gave her a nickname almost immediately, the Russian Rapunzel. It was a marketing decision. The hair was her most distinctive feature, and fairy tale branding sells. The name would follow her for the rest of her life, shaping how the industry saw her, how campaigns positioned her, how she understood her own value. What happened next was swift enough to feel like magic, or maybe like being swept up by a current too strong to resist. By 15, Ruslana had left home and begun traveling to shoots in foreign cities: Milan, Paris, London, New York. By 16, she was sending money back to Kazakhstan, supporting her family from thousands of miles away. By 18, she would be one of the most recognizable young faces in fashion. The fairy tale had begun, but fairy tales, in their original versions, were rarely as gentle as the ones we tell children. They were full of wolves and witches and towers with no doors. They were warnings dressed up as wonder. Ruslana was plucked from obscurity and given a destiny she had never sought. What no one mentioned was that the girl in the tower never chose to be there, and no one asked if she wanted to come down. The trajectory of Ruslana's career looked from the outside like pure ascent. Each year brought new achievements, new validations, new evidence that she had been chosen for something extraordinary. By her late teens, she had appeared on the covers of Vogue Russia, Elle France, and Vogue Italia, publications that represented the pinnacle of the fashion world. She had shot campaigns for Marc Jacobs, Vera Wang, DKNY, and Christian Dior, names that carried weight far beyond the industry. In 2005, British Vogue named her A face to be excited about, the kind of endorsement that could accelerate a career by years. One profile called her fashion's muse of the moment. In 2006, at 18, Ruslana landed the job that would cement her public image permanently. She became the face of Nina Ricci's new perfume, called simply Nina, starring in a commercial where she played a princess climbing a tower of red apples to pluck a magic fruit at the top. The imagery was deliberate. The brand wanted a Rapunzel figure, someone who embodied innocent longing and fairy tale beauty, and Ruslana fit the brief perfectly. Her hair, her face, her ethereal quality all aligned with the fantasy the fragrance was designed to sell. The commercial played internationally. Suddenly, people who had never heard of Ruslana Korshunova, who had never opened a fashion magazine, recognized her anyway. She was the Apple Girl. She was the princess in the tower. That same year, she signed with IMG, the powerhouse agency that represented some of the biggest names in modeling history. She was now on the same roster as Kate Moss and Heidi Klum. Industry sources estimated she was earning between $5,000 and $7,000 per photo shoot. Remarkable money for someone still in her teens. But the numbers told only part of the story. They measured her market value without capturing what it cost to maintain that value. Ruslana's path was typical for Eastern European models of her generation. Discovered young, signed quickly, extracted from home, and dropped into a world of casting calls and go-sees and model apartments shared with strangers from other countries. The pressure began immediately and never let up. These girls were not simply chasing dreams of personal fulfillment. Many of them, Ruslana included, were supporting families back home. Every booking mattered because people were depending on the money. Every rejection carried weight beyond the professional. Ruslana took this responsibility seriously, perhaps more seriously than was healthy for a teenager. She sent a significant portion of her earnings back to Kazakhstan throughout her career. She eventually bought her mother and brother a house, a concrete symbol that the fairy tale was paying off. In Manhattan, she paid a full year's rent up front for her apartment at 130 Water Street, roughly $40,000 handed over at once. It was both a sign of financial success and a hedge against the uncertainty that haunted every model's career. She knew how quickly bookings could dry up. The industry that celebrated her face had little interest in her inner life. She was a product with a marketable look, and the look was the entire point. Whether she was happy, struggling, or slowly drowning beneath the surface of her apparent success was simply not part of the equation. The machine required her to show up, hit her marks, embody the fantasy, and go home. What happened after she left the set was her own problem. One observer would later note with chilling casualness that a stylist discussed Ruslana's death in the same tone he might have used to mention a model gaining a few pounds, as if both were equally unremarkable professional setbacks. This was the world Ruslana had entered at 15. By 18, she understood its terms completely. The fairy tale demanded everything she had. It did not ask how she felt about any of it. It did not care. New York promised glamour. What it delivered for Ruslana and thousands of young women like her was loneliness on a scale she had never experienced before. She was one of hundreds of young models in the city at any given time, many of them immigrants like herself. They came from Russia, Ukraine, Brazil, Poland, anywhere poverty and beauty coincided in the right proportions. The competition was constant and ruthless. There was always someone newer, someone hungrier. The attention these young women received was relentless but rarely sincere. People wanted things from them. Everyone had an angle. A nightlife promoter who observed the scene during those years described the ecosystem bluntly. Everyone wanted a piece of these girls, he said. Club owners who used their presence to attract wealthy clientele, photographers who promised exposure, agents who took percentages of everything, wealthy men who circled with unclear intentions. They get preyed on by everybody, the promoter observed, and everyone has their own agenda. Most of the young women, he noted, were small-town girls from modest backgrounds, completely overwhelmed by a world they had never been prepared for. Ruslana tried to navigate this terrain carefully. A friend from those years remembered attending dinner parties together where rich men had paid for the privilege of dining with models. These arrangements were common in the industry, a way for wealthy men to access beautiful young women framed as networking but carrying obvious undertones. For the models, it was often the only way to get a decent meal. Ruslana went to these dinners, but she and her friend kept their distance from what was being offered beyond the food. They ate and went home early while others stayed. Still, the ecosystem was inescapable. The fashion industry's structure placed young women in constant proximity to people with money, power, and unclear intentions. In 2006, when Ruslana was 18, her name appeared in flight logs for a trip to a private Caribbean island owned by a financier who would later become infamous for serious crimes against young women. She flew on his private plane alongside several others. There is no record of what occurred during that visit, and one survivor from that man's circle later said she did not recall meeting Ruslana. But the mere fact of her presence on that flight illustrates something important about the world she moved through. These girls were funneled toward powerful men through channels they did not control. The fashion world operated with what one industry insider called a see no evil approach. Problems were ignored as long as the models stayed marketable. Mental health struggles went unaddressed. Exploitation was treated as someone else's concern. Ruslana was far from family, far from the culture she had grown up in, far from anyone who knew her as something other than the Russian Rapunzel. She was surrounded by people constantly and yet profoundly alone. The industry saw her hair, her cheekbones, her capacity to embody a fantasy on command. It did not see the 19-year-old who had been working since childhood, who carried her family's financial hopes, who was beginning to wonder if this was all there was. Ruslana had always been a romantic. Friends described her as someone who believed in love the way she had once believed in the fairy tales she resembled. She dreamed of finding the right person, building a life, having children someday. The isolation of her career made that longing sharper. If modeling was transactional and cold, love would be the thing that saved her. Love would see her as a person. Love would make the loneliness worthwhile. In the year or so before her death, she fell deeply for an older man. Reportedly, a wealthy Russian businessman, part of the moneyed circles that intersected with the fashion world. She saw a future with him, marriage, a family, an escape from the relentless uncertainty of modeling. She invested herself completely in this vision. He did not share her vision. To him, the relationship was casual. When it ended, he did not even deliver the news himself. An assistant contacted Ruslana to inform her that she should stop reaching out. The man she had imagined building a life with could not be bothered to end things in person. The rejection devastated her in ways that went beyond ordinary heartbreak. Friends watched her spiral through the months that followed. She lost weight she could not afford to lose. She became consumed by depression. One person close to her said bluntly that the breakup caused her to lose her mind, that she never fully recovered from the disappointment. In March 2008, just a few months before her death, Ruslana wrote a raw entry on her blog. "Why sooner or later love will die," she wrote. "What is even worse is if it ends earlier for my partner than for me. It really hurts when someone stops loving you but you continue to love." She described unrequited love as something that drains the soul's strength. The words were autobiography, written in real time. A friend recalled that Ruslana was always searching for love during this period, dating multiple people in hopes that one relationship would finally become real. The friend tried to offer advice. Stop searching so desperately. Let love find you instead. But Ruslana could not let go of the fairy tale ideal. She had been cast as a princess for years. Somewhere deep down, she still believed a prince was supposed to arrive. The career that had once felt like destiny now felt like just a job, and an increasingly uncertain one. The phone was ringing less often. She was approaching 21, which in modeling years meant she was no longer the fresh discovery she had been at 15. A friend described the shift bluntly. Suddenly, she was one of 1,000 girls. The sense of being special, chosen, fated, it was slipping away. In early 2008, Ruslana posted 5 words in Russian on social media that would later take on terrible weight. "I'm so lost. Will I ever find myself?" She was crying out for help. What she found when she went looking for answers would only make everything worse. Rose of the World presented itself as a personal development program, part of the booming self-improvement industry that had taken root in post-Soviet Russia. Based in Moscow, it promised participants the tools to transform their lives, to overcome their limitations. The marketing materials spoke of breakthroughs and healing. For a young woman feeling lost in every sense, professionally uncertain, romantically devastated, existentially adrift, the appeal was obvious. Ruslana joined the program in early 2008. The courses were expensive, several hundred to over $1,000 for a multi-day session, but they promised results. They promised transformation. What they actually offered was something far more troubling. Investigative journalist Peter Pomerantsev would later expose the organization in extensive detail, even attending some sessions undercover. What he discovered was disturbing. Rose of the World was essentially a repackaged version of a 1970s American organization called LifeSpring. That group had been shut down in the United States after multiple lawsuits from former participants who alleged serious psychological damage. The techniques deemed dangerous enough to end LifeSpring were now being practiced openly in Moscow under a different name. Pomerantsev described the atmosphere inside Rose of the World sessions as deliberately disorienting. Participants entered darkened rooms filled with shouting and confusion. A life trainer would speak so rapidly that people could not think clearly. The techniques were designed to suspend critical thought, to break down psychological defenses. Participants were pressured to share their most painful experiences, to dredge up trauma, to confess their wounds in front of the group. The ideology framed suffering as growth. Psychological distress was not a warning sign. It was evidence that the work was succeeding. People who became upset were accused of self-pity. In one reported instance, a woman who had survived a violent assault was told by trainers that she bore responsibility for what had happened to her. This was the group's idea of therapy. Ruslana entered this environment already vulnerable. She was searching for answers about why everything felt so empty despite her apparent success. She attended alongside her close friend, Anastasia Drozdova, a 19-year-old Ukrainian model who was also searching for something she could not articulate. The two young women entered the Rose together, hoping to emerge transformed. Ruslana did not hold back. Other participants would later remember her as one of the most enthusiastic speakers in the sessions, someone who threw herself into the process with complete commitment. She stood up in front of the group and shared everything: the trauma of losing her father when she was 5 years old, the heartbreak of being discarded by the man she had loved, the growing sense that she no longer knew who she was. The public confession was encouraged by the trainers. It was supposed to be cathartic. Instead, it seemed to destabilize her further. Reopening old wounds without proper support is not healing, it is re-injury. The group had a term for what happened to people like Ruslana during the intensive sessions. They called it a rollback, a psychological regression that they framed as a necessary stage of personal growth. According to a senior coach who would later discuss Ruslana's case, she experienced a severe rollback. She cried through the nights. She wandered through Moscow, not knowing where she was going. She was visibly fragile. The trainers did not view this as a crisis requiring intervention. They viewed it as progress. "You have to go through that to grow," the coach explained afterward. The framework made deterioration look like development. The worse Ruslana felt, the more the group could claim their methods were working. One statement from a Rose of the World coach, uncovered during Pomerantsev's investigation, captures the organization's philosophy with chilling clarity. Sometimes it's better to commit suicide than not to change. The casual way this was expressed reveals something disturbing about the environment Ruslana had entered. Her pain was not being treated. It was being encouraged. For roughly 3 months, Ruslana remained immersed in the program. Then she decided not to continue with the more advanced courses. She left Rose of the World in spring 2008 and returned to New York. But she was not the same person who had left. Friends noticed she remained disoriented even back in familiar surroundings. She wrote on social media that she doubted herself, that she still felt lost. The cult expert Rick Allen Ross later observed that organizations like Rose of the World create dependency on the manufactured intensity of their programs. When people leave, they often experience a crash, a return to reality that feels empty. The trainings become their lives, Ross explained. They come back to emptiness. The sensitive ones break. Ruslana had gone looking for help. She had found a system designed to exploit vulnerability and call the damage growth. In late June 2008, Ruslana appeared to be doing better. She had just returned from a modeling assignment in Paris, a sign that her career was not finished. Her 21st birthday was approaching July 2nd, and she had made plans to celebrate with friends in Pennsylvania. To those around her, she seemed hopeful. A close friend would later say she seemed to be on top of the world. On the evening of Friday, June 27th, Ruslana met with her ex-boyfriend, Artem Perchinok. They had dated for 2 years before breaking up, but they had remained close. Ruslana had reached out and asked to see him. The request felt important, insistent. The evening had a quiet, nostalgic quality. They watched a romantic film together. Ghost, the story about love that transcends death. After the movie, they read love poems aloud to each other, words they had shared when they were still together. Artem would later reflect on that night with terrible clarity. He said Ruslana had insisted on seeing him, as if she needed to close a chapter. "I feel that she came to say goodbye," he said afterward. At the time, he did not understand what that meant. In the early hours of Saturday, June 28th, Artem drove Ruslana back to her apartment at 130 Water Street. He dropped her off around sunrise. They parted without knowing it would be the last time. What happened over the next hours inside that apartment remains partly obscured. Shortly after 2:30 p.m. on that bright Saturday, she fell from a 9th-floor balcony. Witnesses heard an impact so loud some compared it to an explosion. She was pronounced dead at the scene. She was barefoot, dressed in jeans and a tank top. Police found no signs of foul play. Her door was locked. Nothing was disturbed. The construction netting on her balcony had been deliberately cut open, a gap wide enough for someone to pass through. There was no note. What investigators found was her hair. The famous locks that had launched her career were gone. At some point, before she fell, Ruslana had taken scissors to her own hair and cut it short. The ends were uneven, ragged, not the work of a stylist. A Moscow mortician who later prepared her body found it deeply unusual. No drugs or alcohol were in her system. Friends confirmed she rarely drank. The most painful irony, people who knew her said she had always been afraid of heights. Ruslana was buried on July 7, 2008, in Moscow's Kovanskoye Cemetery. Her mother insisted on bringing her home to the city she had loved most. At the funeral, Valentina spoke of her daughter's strength, how fragile she had appeared, how powerful she had actually been. "She was the closest person in the world to me," she said. "I was always proud of her, and I'm proud of her today." Artem was there too. He placed a small book of love poems into her coffin, the same book they had read together on her final night. He also gave her his cross necklace. Later, he tattooed her name on his wrist. In the year that followed, another death echoed Ruslana's with terrible precision. Anastasia Drozdova. Ruslana's death sparked conversations about the fashion industry's treatment of young women, the isolation, the lack of mental health support, the predatory figures who circled them. Journalists wrote about reform, but the industry continued largely unchanged. New faces replaced old ones. The machine moved forward. What remains is the image of a girl who seemed to have everything. International success, beauty that stopped strangers, a nickname that made her sound like she had stepped out of a storybook. And underneath that image, a person who was profoundly alone, who carried her family's hopes on teenage shoulders, who fell in love and was discarded, who sought help and found harm instead, who posted 5 words in Russian that no one answered in time. "I'm so lost. Will I ever find myself?" The fairy tale of Ruslana Korshunova was written by an industry that needed her to be a fantasy. The Russian Rapunzel, the princess climbing the tower, the girl plucked from obscurity and delivered to glory. The story was simple and beautiful and completely untrue. The real story was about the distance between what the world saw and what she felt. That distance grew wider with every campaign, every rejection, every night spent alone in a city that knew her face and nothing else. It grew wider when love failed her, and wider still when the people who promised to help only taught her new ways to suffer. In her final hours, she cut away the hair that had made her. Maybe it was liberation, a rejection of the identity imposed on her since she was 15. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was something we will never have the language to understand. The Rapunzel story ends with the prince climbing the tower and setting the princess free. No one climbed Ruslana's tower. The only way out she found was down. She was 20 years old. She had been working since 15. She had achieved more professional success than most people dream of and felt emptier than anyone who saw her photographs could have guessed. The image that remains is frozen in magazine pages and perfume commercials. A girl who looked like a legend. What the image cannot show is what it cost to maintain. The loneliness, the pressure, the slow erosion of a self that was never given space to develop on its own terms. She was asked to be a fairy tale before she had a chance to figure out who she actually was. She deserved better than the world she was given. She deserved someone to see past the Rapunzel and find the person inside. That never happened. And so the fairy tale ended not with rescue, not with transformation, but with silence, and with questions that will never be fully answered. The distance between image and girl was always there, from the moment a scout decided that face could sell things. It widened with every campaign, every costume she wore. In the end, that distance became too wide to bridge, and the girl who looked like a legend vanished into the gap between who she appeared to be and who she was.